They say a man's worth isn't measured by how he stands in victory, but how he rises after defeat. But what they don't tell you, is how it feels the moment you're knocked flat on your damn back, in front of a room full of people who'd already written your eulogy. That moment came for me at precisely 9:16 a.m., on the 32nd floor of the Everon Group headquarters, a glass tomb overlooking Dallas, cold as the marble under my feet. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and polished steel. I stood at the far end of the elongated obsidian conference table, my name still proudly etched on the executive brass plate in front of me. Funny how fast that name would become nothing more than an inconvenient expense line. Troy Maxwell strutted into the room exactly on time. The kind of man who thought punctuality was a personality trait. 36 years old, dressed in a tailored Brioni suit that probably cost more than my daughter's tuition, hair slicked back like he'd stepped straight out of some Silicon Valley leadership webinar. He didn't bother sitting. Instead, he stood at the head of the table, clicked a tiny remote, and the massive LED screen behind him lit up with a bright, sterile slide titled Operational Efficiency and Human Capital Restructuring. Jesus! They couldn't even call it what it was, a goddamn firing squad. Without preamble, without a hint of hesitation, he started. Gentlemen. Ladies. As you know, our strategic pivot towards a leaner, more agile organizational model requires some hard decisions. His eyes flicked to me for just a second, cold and surgical, like a doctor explaining why he had to amputate the leg. We need people who are young, adaptive, and cost-effective. Legacy positions, his voice paused just long enough for the venom to settle, are no longer aligned with where Everon is headed. He clicked to the next slide. My name was there in bold, under a cheerful heading, Cost versus ROI Analysis, Senior Personnel. Like I was a broken piece of equipment slated for disposal. A liability to be written off. And Marcus Davenport, he said, reading my name with all the warmth of a quarterly report, after an objective review, your position is no longer deemed essential to our future goals. Your contributions are noted. But effective immediately. My fists clenched under the table, knuckles pale against my skin. I swear I could feel every judgmental glance drilling into my back. You are relieved of your position. 8 minutes. 16 years of building this company, and I was dismissed in less time than it takes to order a goddamn latte. Troy gave me the professional nod. Dismissive. Efficient. Like I was a minor inconvenience finally removed from his perfectly curated future. I stood. Straightened my tie, an old blue one Clarissa had given me after her undergrad graduation. To remind you of your priorities, Dad, she'd said. Right. As I turned to leave, I caught the glances. Some pitiful, some smug. A few looked away, pretending they hadn't just watched me get executed without a single bullet fired. But Troy, he didn't look away. No. His smirk sat smug under the sharp angles of his jaw, as if he'd just won a chess game and couldn't wait to tell everyone how brilliant his final move was. The door clicked shut behind me. But the echo of that humiliation, it stayed. That night. The city stretched out beneath my penthouse windows, a sea of lights shimmering like distant galaxies, each one a reminder of the life I'd built brick by agonizing brick. And just like that, gone. The half-empty bottle of Glenlivet sat next to the photograph of Clarissa at her MBA acceptance celebration. Her cap tilted slightly, that crooked smile that always reminded me of her mother. God, how many moments had I traded for boardrooms and contract negotiations? How many birthdays missed, how many empty chairs at school recitals? My phone buzzed. A message from Clarissa. Dad, you'll make it to my MBA graduation this time, right? Promise me. I stared at that screen until the text blurred through the sting in my eyes. My hands shook as I set the glass down harder than I should have. Promise her. I couldn't promise her anything. Not yet. But as I stood there, staring out at the endless city lights, something in me snapped back into place. A part of me I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't finished. And I sure as hell wasn't broken. My father used to say, "Son, sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what you're really made of." I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass window, staring down at the city like a battlefield waiting for my return. "Never again," I whispered under my breath, my voice low and certain. "No one will ever look down on me again. And when I return, it won't be for a job. It'll be to take everything they thought I couldn't have." That was the night I stopped being a loyal servant of Everon. And started planning their funeral. Part 2, The Silent Game, Preparing for Counterattack. By dawn, the haze of whiskey had cleared, replaced by a razor-sharp clarity I hadn't felt in years. The board was set. And if Troy Maxwell thought he'd already won, he clearly hadn't played against me before. I reached into the back of my office closet, the one place no one but me ever touched. Behind a row of forgotten golf trophies and corporate plaques gathering dust was my old leather-bound Rolodex. Not a digital database. Not some soulless CRM. This was the real treasure. 16 years of relationships, handwritten in the ink of trust and loyalty. Each page carried more than just names and numbers. Scribbled next to them were personal details most men in my line of work would consider trivial. But I knew better. Arnold Hayes, CEO of Reed Industrial. Loves single malt scotch, allergic to shellfish, daughter Emily graduated from Stanford last year. Meredith Langford, chairwoman at Summit Ventures. Lost her husband 2 years ago, volunteers at the Dallas Cancer Institute every Thursday afternoon. Favorite restaurant, the Garden Terrace. Details. Humanity. The stuff algorithms couldn't touch. My fingers hesitated over the name I needed first. Not a client. Not yet. But a man smart enough to see what was coming before anyone else did. Douglas Harlow. The line barely rang twice before Douglas picked up. Marcus Davenport. Now there's a name I didn't expect to hear before breakfast, he chuckled, voice rich with that unshakable confidence only CEOs who'd survived every market storm possessed. Cutting straight to it, "Doug," I said. "Last year, over drinks, you said you needed someone to open doors you couldn't even knock on. You still need that man?" There was a pause, the kind heavy with calculation. "Are you saying you have the keys?" I glanced back at the worn leather Rolodex, my thumb resting on a page full of billion-dollar names. "Not keys, Douglas," I said with a slow smile. "I have the whole damn keyring." We agreed to meet the following day. But I wasn't waiting around to play defense. If Troy wanted a modernized Everon, built on spreadsheets and automation, I'd remind him that real power wasn't in algorithms, it was in the hands of people. While Troy paraded himself across media outlets, preaching about efficiency and eliminating legacy burdens, I took a different path. I didn't call CEOs directly. That would have been obvious. Predictable. Instead, I reached out to the real gatekeepers, the executive assistants, the personal secretaries, the people who actually decided whether a meeting ever made it onto their bosses' calendars. I sent exactly one message to each. "I've moved on from Everon. If anyone wants to catch up, I'm always open for a quiet coffee. No pressure. No desperation. No hard sell. Just a gentle reminder that I was still out there, and available." By noon, I had 5 responses. By dinner, a dozen more. That evening, the television in the corner of my apartment flashed with Troy's smug face as he stood behind a sleek podium at the Dallas Business Leadership Summit. And as part of our modernization strategy, Everon is streamlining outdated processes and, frankly, eliminating legacy inefficiencies. We're creating a leaner, smarter organization built for the digital age. I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh as I swirled the last of my bourbon. Legacy inefficiencies? That was me he was talking about. The camera panned in as Troy flashed that toothy, rehearsed smile. In today's business world, relationships are nice, but results are non-negotiable. Emotional loyalty doesn't appear on a balance sheet, ladies and gentlemen. That was his biggest mistake. He'd forgotten that behind every data point on his precious spreadsheet stood a person. A father worried about his daughter's college tuition. A mother struggling to leave her company after personal loss. People. Real people. And while Troy was busy flexing his jawline and buzzwords for the cameras, I was already planting seeds with those very people. Seeds that would soon bear fruit he couldn't buy back. By midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another message from an assistant at Crestmont Logistics, one of Everon's top clients. Mr. Davenport, Mr. Kincaid was asking about you today. I told him you might have some time now. He smiled. A rare thing these days. I smiled too. The board may not have seen it yet, but Troy's ship had already sprung its first leaks. And the water was rising fast. I picked up the glass, took one last slow sip, and turned off the TV just as Troy's perfectly rehearsed press conference faded to black. Enjoy the spotlight while you can, I muttered under my breath. You're standing on thin ice, and the thaw's coming quicker than you think. Tomorrow, I would meet with Douglas Harlow. But tonight, I slept better than I had in months. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting to react. I was already 3 moves ahead. It started with a single domino. On Monday morning, as the city was still shaking off its weekend hangover, I got the first call. My phone vibrated across the kitchen counter just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. The caller ID flashed, Arnold Hayes, Reed Industrial. I hadn't spoken to Arnold in nearly 4 months, but I knew exactly why he was calling. I pressed the answer button and leaned against the counter, savoring the moment before the storm. Marcus, Arnold's gruff voice rumbled through the line. No pleasantries, no wasted time. I just sat through a 3-hour sermon from your replacement. Troy Maxwell, ever heard of him? A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. I've had the pleasure. He sin tai ky thuit so, Arnold mimicked, his Texas drawl practically choking on the phrase. That's all the bastard could talk about. APIs this, SaaS that. Didn't ask a damn thing about my supply chain issues. And hell, the man couldn't even remember my daughter's name. You know, the one you personally helped get that Stanford scholarship. Emily, I answered without hesitation. There was a long pause. Then Arnold let out a low chuckle. Damn right. That's the kind of thing that matters, Marcus. You still working, or are you officially done with those clowns at Everon? I'm in transition, I said carefully, knowing full well where this was headed. Well, consider me your first official transition. Send the paperwork. I'm pulling our contracts from Everon. We're following you, wherever you're headed. I didn't smile often these days, but in that moment, I couldn't help it. By Wednesday, it wasn't just Arnold. One by one, the titans of my contact book began making their moves. Meredith Langford from Summit Ventures called personally. She didn't mince words either. Troy tried to impress me with a VR presentation on predictive market analytics, she scoffed. Marcus, I run a venture capital firm, not a damn gaming arcade. If he says, market disruption one more time, I'm going to disrupt his face with my martini glass. By Thursday night, I had 9 formal notifications from major Everon clients, 9 powerhouses representing nearly 38% of their annual revenue. Gone. Just like that. And the best part? I hadn't even made a single sales pitch. They came to me. Friday morning, the corporate mask started to crack. The first sign. A legal envelope delivered directly to my apartment. Cease and desist. The message inside was as predictable as it was pathetic. Accusations of corporate espionage, data theft, client solicitation, classic corporate saber-rattling from a man quickly realizing his empire was crumbling under his overpriced Italian loafers. The letter was signed by Everon's legal team, but I could practically see Troy's trembling hand behind every word. I placed the letter neatly next to the Glenlivet bottle, poured myself a modest drink, and leaned back in my chair. They were panicking. Good. The phone rang again that afternoon. Lisa Monroe, the company's longtime senior accountant and one of the last decent souls still trapped inside that sinking ship. Her voice was tight, urgent. "Marcus, it's happening. Troy's throwing you under every bus he can find. He's telling the board you hacked the CRM, leaked confidential data, that you're running some kind of corporate hit job. It's bad. They're in a closed-door session right now." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass and took a slow sip. "Let me guess. Troy's also promising he can fix this if they just give him time." Lisa sighed. "Exactly. But the board's not buying it. You should know, Marcus. They're scared. The shareholders are already whispering about a vote of no confidence." "Let them whisper," I said quietly. Whispering always comes before screaming. A pause on the line, and then Lisa's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Marcus, what's your endgame?" I let that question hang in the air for a moment. It wasn't the first time I'd asked myself the same thing. But the answer had never been clearer. "Lisa," I said, standing and walking to the window overlooking the city. The Dallas skyline shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, bright and fragile like glass about to shatter. "I'm not looking for revenge," I continued. "Revenge is small. What I want, is for Troy to watch everything he tried to build collapse around him. And when he finally comes crawling back, when he realizes his empire was built on sand and lies." I took another sip. "That's when I'll show him just how permanent failure can be." By nightfall, word was already spreading. Internal memos from Everon leaked online, frantic attempts to reassure investors, desperate outreach programs offering massive discounts to hold on to fleeing clients. But it was too late. They hadn't just lost business. They'd lost trust. And trust? That's the kind of thing you don't get back with a discount. At exactly 10:47 p.m., my phone lit up again. A message from an unlisted number. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." The sender? Troy Maxwell. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I allowed a thin, knowing smile to form. Let him sweat a little longer. The game wasn't over. It was just getting interesting. The Blue Harbor Lounge smelled like polished leather and old money, exactly the kind of place Troy Maxwell fancied himself belonging to. I arrived 15 minutes early, settled into a corner booth with a direct view of the entrance. The bartender, recognizing me from better days, slid over a Glenlivet without asking. At exactly 9:05 p.m., Troy walked in. For a man who usually strutted like he owned every room, tonight he looked like a man stepping onto a battlefield he knew he couldn't win. His suit hung a little looser, the carefully sculpted smirk replaced by a tight line of frustration. He spotted me and made his way over, each step slower than the last. "Marcus," he exhaled, slumping into the booth across from me. His eyes darted around the room like he was afraid someone might see him here, afraid someone might witness his defeat. He didn't waste time. "We'll double your salary," he started, voice low but hurried. "Plus a signing bonus." "Significant. Name the number." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, the ice clinking faintly in the silence between us. "Troy," I said, my voice calm and deliberate. "If you think this is about money, you've learned absolutely nothing." His jaw tightened. "Everything's about money, Davenport. Don't play saint with me." I leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on his like a hunter studying a wounded animal. "I'm not interested in your offer. But I do have a proposal of my own." His brows lifted cautiously. I set my glass down gently, rotating it with my fingertips. "Go to each of the clients you've lost. Stand in front of them, look them in the eye, and apologize. Personally. Publicly. For every lie you sold, for every promise you broke. And when you're done, you kneel, right there in front of them, and you ask them how it feels to have been treated like a balance sheet liability. The blood drained from his face. "You're out of your goddamn mind," he hissed, pushing up from the booth so hard the table rattled. I didn't flinch. I simply picked up my drink again, swirling the liquid lazily. "Then you have no moves left, Troy. And sooner or later, you'll learn something I figured out a long time ago: trust, once lost, doesn't come back with a paycheck." He stood there for a moment, fists clenched, his carefully crafted world crumbling around him. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out. I didn't watch him leave. I just sat there, finishing my drink, the faintest smile playing at the corner of my mouth. That night, just after midnight, my phone rang. No caller ID. The voice that answered when I picked up was old, weathered like leather left out in the Texas sun for too many years. "You think it's over, boy?" the voice rasped. "You think you've won?" I sat up straighter, heart pounding, the tone of that voice cutting through the lingering satisfaction like a razor. "There are things buried deeper than you realize. Things you don't see. Be careful, Marcus. You're standing on ice that's thinner than it looks. And beneath it, a shallow, wheezing breath. The water's colder than you're prepared for." Before I could speak, the line went dead. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark, the faint glow of the city stretching endlessly beyond my windows. That voice. It couldn't be. Harold Brenner. The man who built Everon from nothing. The founder. The legend. The ghost they tried to bury along with his old-fashioned ways. He was supposed to be retired. Gone. But if that call was anything to go by, Harold wasn't done yet. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I'd been playing this game. Or if I was just another piece on someone else's board. The call from Harold Brenner haunted me well into the next day. His warning wasn't just cryptic, it was calculated. A reminder that even the smartest men sometimes forget to look up from the chessboard and realize they're not the ones moving the pieces. By noon, the final puzzle piece fell into place. A sleek black car pulled up in front of the Kingsley and Mercer headquarters. I had been summoned, not invited, not requested, summoned. And that alone should have been the first red flag. Patricia Lennox didn't bother with small talk when I walked into her corner office. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the Dallas skyline, but her presence dominated the room more than the view ever could. She sat there, perfectly composed, her hands folded neatly on the desk. Behind that calm exterior, though, I could see it, the unmistakable glint of victory in her eyes. "Marcus," she began smoothly, like this was all part of some inevitable conclusion. "Congratulations. You've done remarkable work these past few weeks." I stayed standing. "You say that like I was working for you." She smiled, slow and knowing. "In a way, you were." That smile. That was the moment I felt it, like a cold hand sliding up my spine. I had been so focused on dismantling Troy Maxwell, on toppling Everon, that I hadn't stopped to ask the one question that mattered. Who really benefited from the chaos? Patricia leaned back in her chair, crossing one elegant leg over the other. "Do you really think Troy orchestrated this entire collapse by himself? The reckless hiring of inexperienced managers? The aggressive firings? The sudden shift in Everon's corporate strategy that conveniently tanked their stock price?" My throat tightened. "You're saying?" "I'm saying," she interrupted smoothly, "that every bad decision Troy made was encouraged. Quietly. Strategically." She stood and walked toward the panoramic window, her reflection faint against the glass. "Marcus, you were brilliant. Ruthless. And effective. But you were playing checkers while I was playing chess. You took down Troy, but that's exactly what I needed. And now, with Everon's valuation in the gutter, Kingsley and Mercer will acquire their remaining assets for pennies on the dollar." It hit me then, the entire game had been rigged. And I'd been the perfect pawn, or worse, the queen she'd move precisely when and where she needed. I clenched my fists. So why am I here, Patricia? Gloating? Or do you have another move planned for me? She turned, her face unreadable now. You're not a pawn, Marcus. You never were. You're the piece everyone underestimates. The most dangerous piece on the board. And I want you on my side, permanently. She slid a sleek folder across the desk toward me. My name printed neatly across the front. CEO of the newly formed Lennox-Everon Alliance. The board has already approved it. You'll have full operational control. Complete autonomy. And, of course, the compensation package is appropriate for someone of your talents. My pulse thundered in my ears. It was everything I'd fought for. Power. Control. Recognition. But it wasn't mine. Not really. I was being offered the crown to a kingdom built on someone else's battlefield. Every decision, every sacrifice I'd made, had been just another calculated step in Patricia's endgame. I closed the folder without looking at it. And if I say no? Patricia's expression didn't flicker. Then you walk away. And by Monday, someone else will have your office. The clients you brought in. They'll stay, regardless. You can start over from scratch, or you can rule the empire you helped build. I turned toward the window, the city sprawling endlessly before me. Rule an empire, or build my own. Every man faces that choice at least once in his life. And only a few have the guts to start from zero. When I turned back, Patricia was still smiling, but I could see it, the faintest flicker of uncertainty. Thank you for the offer, I said quietly, pushing the folder back across her desk. But I don't need a throne handed to me, Patricia. I'm perfectly capable of building my own. For the first time since I walked into her office, she looked genuinely surprised. You're sure about this, Marcus? Walking away from all of it? I gave her the same smile she had worn earlier. Calm. Confident. Unshakable. I'm not walking away. I'm walking toward something better. And with that, I left. No handshakes. No goodbyes. Just the sound of my footsteps echoing through her glass castle as I walked out to build something she could never control. My own empire. One where I was the player, not the piece. 2 weeks after I walked out of Patricia Lennox's glass fortress, I found myself sitting across from my daughter, Clarissa, at our favorite little Italian restaurant on Elm Street. No grand executive lounges or private rooftop clubs, just the simple warmth of brick walls, candlelight, and the scent of fresh basil in the air. She studied me with those sharp eyes she inherited from her mother, her MBA graduation cap resting beside her chair like a quiet reminder of how much time I'd missed. So, she started, twirling the stem of her wine glass between her fingers. Did you win? The question hung between us, heavier than the air itself. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze wandering toward the large window behind her. Dallas sprawled out under the night sky, glittering and vast, a kingdom of light stretching to the horizon. I won, I said quietly. But not on their board. Clarissa tilted her head, eyes narrowing. What does that mean? I smiled faintly. It means some victories aren't about taking the throne, Clarissa. Sometimes, it's about refusing to sit on the wrong one. The days that followed moved faster than I'd expected. Word got out that I'd turned down Patricia's offer. For some, that made me a legend. For others, a fool. But for me? It meant freedom. I didn't jump back into the corporate war zone. I didn't start another conglomerate or raise venture capital for some flashy startup. Instead, I built something smaller. Leaner. But mine. An executive consultancy, focused solely on one thing, rebuilding trust where corporations had destroyed it. No boardrooms. No shareholders. Just me, my team of hand-picked professionals, people who still believed in handshakes, in keeping their word, in answering their phone on weekends because a client needed them, not because it was scheduled in their CRM. One morning, as I walked into our modest downtown office, a small, carefully wrapped package sat on my desk. No sender's name. Just a note tucked neatly beneath the string. Inside was an old photo, faded, the edges worn with time. 4 men standing in front of a battered storefront. Western Business Solutions. Harold Brenner's first company, The Roots of Everon. And standing there, younger by a lifetime, was me, smiling like a man who hadn't yet learned how brutal the world could be. On the back of the photo, in neat, careful handwriting, it read: "People sign contracts with people. But the ones who write the rules, they win the real game." H.B. I sat back in my chair, the weight of that moment pressing into me harder than I cared to admit. Harold had known it all along. I thought I'd mastered the game by outmaneuvering Troy. But the real victory? It wasn't in winning their game. It was walking away from it altogether. That evening, as I left the office, the streets of Dallas buzzed with life. Cars hummed, distant sirens wailed faintly, and the city lights blinked like stars fallen to earth. Clarissa called as I walked toward my car. "Dad," she said, her voice softer now, warmer. "You sound lighter these days." "I am," I admitted. "For the first time in a long while." "Did you ever regret not taking the offer?" she asked. I stopped at the corner, watching the traffic lights cycle from red to green. "Not for a second," I said. "You know what the funny thing is, Clarissa? Power isn't about sitting at the biggest table. It's about choosing which table you sit at, or walking away from all of them when the conversation's no longer worth having." She laughed softly. "That sounds like something I should write down." I smiled. "Do that. And remind me when I forget." Before I hung up, she said one last thing. "Dad. I'm proud of you." It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But those words carried more weight than any corporate title I'd ever worn. In the end, this wasn't a story about revenge. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about power. It was about choice. The choice to be a pawn. The choice to be a king. Or the hardest choice of all, to walk away from the game and build something entirely your own. And if there's one thing I've learned after all these years, it's this. In the game of power, if you don't want to be a piece on someone else's board, you damn well better start designing the board yourself. And above all, never lose yourself just to win a game that isn't worth playing.